right. So we're going to get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone dialing in from India, at least. For our friends from the UK, good morning. For those dialing in from the US, bravo. It is super early there. So if we have some folks from there, that's just amazing. Well, welcome to the 13th edition of the Dasra Philanthropy Week. While the last decade has given us great reason to celebrate our economic progress, the devastating pandemic has forced us to confront our reality. There are two stark realities: becoming one of the fastest growing major economies called India, and the other called Bharat, where 400 million realities have become the largest number of extreme poor globally. With this backdrop and the fresh wounds of COVID, this year's forum focuses on continuity, community, and convergence. Sharing learnings for collaborative action for greater continuity, keeping community at the center, and forcing convergence towards inclusive, scalable solutions, accelerating Dasra's vision of a transformed India where a billion thrive with dignity and equity. With you today, Dasra celebrates its 22 years of pioneering an approach to shaping collaborative philanthropy, which has new players, tremendous innovation, and changing landscape. In this dynamic landscape, Dasra's work continues to be guided by a strong belief in prioritizing the lives of vulnerable communities, trusting and respecting the wisdom of local, homegrown nonprofits, and leveraging the power of trust-based networks to build social capital with a JEDI lens: gender, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Dasra now thrives on two core capabilities: leading collaborative platforms and catalyzing proximate philanthropy towards Dasra's mission of collaborative action to accelerate social change. Since 1999, Dasra has strengthened the social sector talent pipeline with over 350 Dasra alumni, fundraised more than $280 million, supported over 1,000 diverse NGOs across the country, and affected the lives of over 90 million Indians. We need a philanthropic revolution and a bold ambition. And by 2030, Dasra aims to raise $1 billion and affect over 500 million lives. Join us in this urgent call to action. #ABillionThriving. The nation needs you, Bharat needs you. And with that, I formally welcome all of you here to our session called Road to Resilience: From Breakdown to Breakthrough, or as our team calls it, the official launch of the Rebuild India Fund. We have a little less than an hour and a half together, during which we will watch a short video that introduces the fund and shares perspective from organizations on the front line. We'll then build on that video and actually hear live from nonprofit leaders in a conversation facilitated by my amazing colleague Sangeeta, who's actually been the backbone of curating this enormously large and amazing portfolio of 152 organizations. And so she'll facilitate that conversation, followed by a virtual fireside chat with Deval Sanghvi and Maya Patel, which will be facilitated by Dasra board member Sonal Sachdev Patel. And then finally, at the end, I'll come back and share a little more information about both the Rebuild India Fund, but also what the milestones Dasra has achieved over the last 12 months of running an ambitious rapid relief campaign. And with that, we can cue to our video, please.
Nearly 2 years of COVID has affected India at scale, posing long-term challenges for millions of vulnerable communities. Today, we face an urgent need for the philanthropic community to support the resilience of grassroots NGOs through long-term flexible funding, so that they can survive these uncertain times and continue to serve India's most marginalized and vulnerable communities. Let us hear from the voices of these NGO leaders.
कुल मिला के जो रोजगार का मुख्य साधन मजदूरी है और वो भी प्रवास आधारित मजदूरी, तो हर तरह के प्रवासी मजदूरों की जो मजदूरी थी इस ब्लॉक की, वो खत्म हुई। और घर पे आने के बाद भी इन परिवारों के पास कोई ज़्यादा रोजगार के साधन नहीं बचे। जो इफेक्टेड है कोविड के, वो भी यहाँ की कम्युनिटी के लिए रहे, और सबसे ज़्यादा जो प्रभावित हुए वो बच्चे और महिलाएं। तो स्कूल बंद होने से सीधा प्रभाव बच्चों पे पड़ा। और एक तरफ तो माँ बाप के पास भी खाने के लिए कुछ था, तो उन्होंने अपने बच्चों को मजदूरी पे भेजना शुरू किया। सरकार ने जरूर ये योजना चलाई थी कि हम ऑनलाइन बच्चों को पढ़ाएंगे, लेकिन यहाँ कनेक्टिविटी नहीं है, घरों में एंड्रॉयड मोबाइल नहीं है, स्मार्टफोन नहीं है। तो उस वजह से सिर्फ 3% बच्चे ही पूरे ब्लॉक के, जो गवर्नमेंट डेटा है, गवर्नमेंट ये कह रही है कि 3% बच्चों को हम पढ़ा पाए इस दौरान।
Domestic workers are neither recognized as skilled workers, nor are they valued or their work valued or dignified. They are not considered labor under any of the labor laws. In fact, they are working in everybody's homes, but they're absent from policies across board. So therefore, we think that domestic workers are the visible invisible. Sexual harassment was already an issue with domestic workers, and the informality of work does increase their vulnerabilities and the fear of speaking up about the sexual harassment. And because of the pandemic and because of the pressures of not having a job, they became more vulnerable to quid pro quo forms of sexual harassment.
नोमैडिक एंड डीनोटिफाइड ट्राइब यानी घुमंतु जनजातियां भारत के परिप्रेक्ष्य में बहुत बड़ी पैमाने पे एक जनसंख्या जो है वो हमारे सामने आती है, जो हमारी नजरों को हमेशा दिखती है, जो कलाओं की और मनोरंजन के माध्यम से हमेशा हमारे आसपास होते हैं। लेकिन जब कोरोना जैसी महामारी का अनुभव होता है तो ये समुदाय बहुत ही ज्यादा संसाधनहीन है, जानकारीहीन है, उस तरह का प्रतिनिधित्व इस समुदाय के पास नहीं है। तो इस तरह के महामारी को जब अनुभव करना हुआ तो इस समुदाय के रोजगार के बहुत ही अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर में काम करते हैं, असंगठित कामगार है, इंडिविजुअल कामगार है, और उस तरह का सोशल और पॉलिटिकल किसी भी तरह का एक स्ट्रॉन्ग और बलबूते के साथ रिप्रेजेंटेशन इन कम्युनिटी का नहीं है।
So there is a need for unrestricted funding for organization that will bring in innovation, that will bring in new ways of thinking and new design to work with people, which is often missing. And what happens is when we want to expand, when we want to do new things, we don't have money. So the investors have to really work and look at the organization, look at all the processes in organization, build trust and say, yes, this is the organization which is reaching out to people. We need to support them so that they can do more and more innovative work with the people. That is why that kind of a unrestricted funding is very, very essential.
With everything we've heard and learned over the past 2 years, Dasra and Tarsadia Foundation are expanding our COVID relief campaign and launching the Rebuild India Fund. Rebuild is a $50 million fund that is committing 5 years of flexible funding, backed by capacity building support to 100 new grassroots NGOs each year. We invite you to join us on this journey.
Good afternoon, everyone. A big note of thanks to the NGO leaders who lent their voices and thoughts to this video. Thank you, Sarfaraz, Nalini, Nandita, and Deepa. What we just heard was a small glimpse of the vulnerabilities some of the most marginalized communities in India face. The unforgettable sights of migrant workers walking with their lives placed overhead, the spike in domestic violence, increase in child labor, among other issues, might have highlighted these vulnerabilities, but these are not new challenges. Communities in India have been living a challenging reality for a while. While COVID aggravated many such vulnerabilities and pushed these communities further down the line of marginalization, if we want to bring about real change and create an India where 1 billion thrive with dignity and equity, we have to realize that this is not a pandemic-induced problem and needs conversations and action that go beyond COVID relief. I am Sangeeta, and over the next 45 minutes, we will attempt to understand different aspects of these vulnerabilities that communities, especially the marginalized ones, face? And how do organizations that aim to support these communities address those challenges? We will also discuss how can these organizations working at the front line be best equipped to continue supporting such communities so that they can thrive. Please join me in welcoming 5 great leaders who work across different parts of the country towards empowering many such communities. We have with us today Hasina Kharbi, founder and managing director of Impulse NGO Network, an organization that works on issues such as human trafficking, unsafe migration in the Northeast. Lindsay Barnes, director of Jan Chetna Manch Bokaro, an organization that works on eliminating poverty and discrimination across villages in the district of Bokaro, Jharkhand. Nalini Shekhar, co-founder of Hasidu Dala, an organization that works with waste pickers and other waste workers in multiple cities of Karnataka. Dr. Pavitra Mohan, co-founder of Basic Healthcare Services, an organization that focuses on providing high quality, low-cost primary healthcare services for vulnerable communities in Rajasthan. And finally, Saraswati Padmanabhan, founder and director of Diyaghar, an organization that focuses on preschool education for children of migrant workers. Thank you all for joining us in this panel today. I'll start with you, Nalini. In the video, you briefly spoke about the need for unrestricted funding. But before we talk about that in greater detail, help us understand the context in which the communities that you work with live, and how does Hasidu Dala attempt to help these communities?
So we work with waste pickers, and waste pickers are people who pick up recyclable waste on the street, walking 5 to 7 kilometers a day, bending 1,000 times to pick up something you and me throw as waste. Through their labor of sorting and grading, they make it into a tradable commodity. So without their work, there is no recycling at all. And so our work has always been moving them from invisibility to visibility. That's been our journey as Hasidu Dala. And their contribution, economic contribution to the city has saved about 84 crores per year on just a collection and transportation of waste, because that is subsidized by the waste pickers. And they are also environmentalists, because their work is actually leaves negative carbon footprint. So looking at all that, we said in 10 years, this is 2010 we started, I said in 10 years, there will be no waste on the street, because once the city becomes more equipped and better at servicing the citizens, then you will see less waste on the street. That means less access to waste. So we really worked with the local government. We trained our waste pickers more in terms of behavior change of, look, things are going to change. Can we change? Can we be agile in our work style? Can we change our work style? So today we have been able to manage about 30% of Bangalore city. It's a metro city, 30% of cities, specifically dry waste. And we work with about 40 entrepreneurs. I would say they're nano entrepreneurs, not even micro, very small entrepreneurs, and each one creating any jobs between 10 and 15,000. So it gives a predictable income. So we believe that predictable income coupled with social security access will bring in the better standard of living in the absence of the living wages. So we want to move towards living wages, but in its absence, this is the thing. And many of our waste pickers today, the micro entrepreneurs, are actually filing income tax returns. And before pandemic, there was a study which showed after Hasidu Dala's intervention with the adults, child labor in this sector has decreased. That I can proudly say now. Things have changed because of the pandemic, especially in the smaller cities, not in Bangalore, but other cities. So those are some of the challenges. We continue to work, and we co-create any of the interventions that we do. So we have been successful because our waste pickers take their leadership to bring in change in their communities. So that's what is our work.
Thank you, Nalini. Thanks so much. Lindsay, if I could move to you to talk to us about the same aspect in the communities that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll speak mostly about the women in childbirth and pregnancy. I think that is in the last 2-3 years, because of COVID, has been particularly hard hit. I mean, we're already working in a marginalized community as it is in the villages in Bokaro in Jharkhand. And within the marginalized communities, these are marginalized farmers. Many of the families, members, they have already migrated out. And, during the lockdown, it sort of hit these families very hard. And the women who were in childbirth and pregnancy, I feel the changes that we've made over the last 2 decades were just thrown to the wind, because it seems that the changes are very superficial. Like, women are not going to hospitals for an institutional delivery because it's quality care. They're going for various other incentives, and it really exposed this, sort of how superficial changes have been made, and how quickly families could abandon women during childbirth, because we're talking with to families whose previous experience of childbirth was all home-based. We've gone from 95% home births to 95% institutional births in one generation. So those changes are really quite superficial. And during the lockdown, many of the small nursing homes and hospitals, they close their doors. The Anganwadis close their doors. And it seems like everybody's washing themselves of women. And so what we did, we kept our doors open. And I think one of the reasons we could do that is because we are a community-based organization, and our people who are running the show, they're community people themselves, and we have hardly anybody who is come from outside to work in our organization. And I think over the last 20 to 30 years, we've been investing in local people to run the show. And I think what is really, one of the positive things of COVID, there's not many of them, but one of them is it's shown us that this investment in local people has paid off, because in times of a crisis like this, we could continue, we managed, and there was no need to stop any of our services. In fact, some of them were expanded. We started telemedicine for neonatal care. We started telemedicine for mental health. Right. So we forced us to be a bit more innovative. Yeah.
Sorry, Lindsay. Sorry. Thank you so much.
My 4 minutes are up.
Thank you. If I could move to you, Hasina, in the Northeast, the kind of communities and issues that you work with, if you could just help us understand the context of those communities.
Thank you very much, Dasra. I think this is just a wonderful platform for nonprofit who's already facing a lot of challenges, right, in sustaining the work that we've been doing for years. I represent Impulse NGO Network. We are 32 years in existence. The work that we have been working in the last 32 years is working with unsafe migration, especially cross-border issues, which leads to human trafficking. And the fact that we are having a lot of international borders, its vulnerability grows higher every day. Contextually, if you're looking right now, the kind of work of many years has unfolded to a situation where we have displacement from Myanmar in the Northeast, making these communities highly vulnerable to human trafficking. And I think that the fact that when we work with these kind of communities, just ensuring relief at one point of at just one go does not solve the problem. The longer version is how we strengthen their economic when they are displaced in these communities. That's what we are trying to do right now, addressing the displaced people through economic upliftment, food security, which is in longer term, which is also having impact on the environment. When people are pushed into the forest, then you find deforestation happening. So it's always a situation of two ways. And then when people are pushed to no economic and no food, then they are getting vulnerable, especially women and children. That's a community that we are addressing highly at the moment. Of course, in many years, we have seen the kind of challenge of human trafficking. We have seen the kind of challenge that human trafficking has poses because of natural disasters, displacement situation, of cross-border issues. And that is the work that we have taken on for a longer time. But a lot of time when we look at human trafficking, I think one aspect that people look only at rescue operation. We are not looking at long-term prevention mechanism. And when we are trying to journey a long-term prevention mechanism, we are trying to see that we need to have resources that can actually address that, not address a situation when human trafficking takes place at the destination point. Because then, after that, it's just about dealing with the crime. I'm not saying that we should not rescue. We have done that for many years. We have, in fact, impacted collectively with our partners organization more than 73,000 cases. But at the end of the day, we could have stopped, those kind of cases from being vulnerable. So that is the factor we are journeying ourselves. And of course, we are taking it from the perspective of social impact businesses that is having higher value and giving women that choice not to migrate unsafely.
Thank you so much, Hasina, for that powerful speech. If I could move to you, Saraswati, in the context of Diya Ghar, if you could help us understand this thing.
Sure. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be on this platform, and thank you, Dasra, for bringing people together, having these conversations during this time. So Diya Ghar works with children of migrant laborers. And, one thing that COVID brought out how terrible the situation is for these communities that come to our cities. So in Bangalore, we have communities coming from North Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and now we've also been working with communities that come from North India as well, right? And so they come here, they live, we work with the most vulnerable, where they live in blue tint communities, they live in tin sheet homes. And, we started Diya Ghar 6 years ago. And when I started it, when I went in, I really thought this was temporary settlements, that, the construction will be done and they will move out. And, and it was really sad to know that these families are in that same living conditions for 15, 20 years. And there's no running water, no electricity, no sanitation. Children don't have access to schools, the preschool children, right? I mean, there are Anganwadis run by the government, but the parents can't drop them at 9, pick them up at 3 o'clock. And so they leave their children in the communities, either being cared for by an older child. And sometimes, we've had 3-year-old children taking care of their 1.5-year-old siblings, and we've brought these sibling groups into Diya Ghar. Or they take them with them to construction sites, take them with them to work. And here children are not only neglected, but they're exposed to so much abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And we know 0 to 6 years is such a critical time in a child's life, right? And so that's how we started Diya Ghar. We started 6 years ago. It's wonderful to be in the midst of people doing this for decades. And, we're looking forward to learning from all of you on this journey as well. And we started because we used to see children playing on construction sites. We used to see them outside communities. And we said, we are so careful about our children. I had 3 young children, they're still very young. And, and how do we look at these children just, out there without having good food on an everyday basis, without being in a safe space? So we started with early childhood care and education. And before COVID, we used to bring them into our centers and provide a full day program, breakfast, lunch, and evening snacks. And we use the Montessori method to teach them math, English, Kannada, help them with their fine motor, gross motor skills, and help them to get into class 1. And here, these are communities where they think our children can never go to school, right? And so just to work with them and say that, it is possible for your children to get an education, and to see these parents really light up with a new hope for their children. With COVID, of course, everything changed for all of us here. And one thing we were able to do was we were able to continue taking classes. So, we were doing things differently every week, doing different things every week. So we started, of course, with videos and learning kits along with our food relief. And then we said, this is not enough. And so we started taking classes in the community for small groups of children, went on to build community centers. And, over the last 2 years, we've been able to grow from 3 centers before COVID to about 14 centers with 750 children. And it's, we just count it such a joy and privilege to be in these communities during this time, when they're going through so much, to just help them with their children and help the communities during this time.
Thank you so much, Saraswati. Dr. Pavitra, if you could come in to share your views from the perspective of PHS. Dr. Pavitra, you're on mute.
Thanks. So the areas that DHS works.
We can't hear you, Dr. Pavitra. Maybe just increase the volume a little bit.
Am I audible now?
The volume is very low.
Okay, just give me a minute.
Sure, sure.
Am I audible now?
Much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Please continue.
Thank you. Okay. So the areas that we work in are rural areas of South Rajasthan, which are far from the city, far from the town, and far from any nearest health facilities or roads. These are areas which are predominantly where tribal communities live, and the rainfall is very, very erratic, and the land holdings are extremely small, because of which very large number of people migrate out of their villages at a very early age, 12 years, 14 years, 15 years, in search of work in cities like Gujarat, Ahmedabad, and Surat and Mumbai, and leaving behind the family, the women and the parents and the children in the households. These are also very food scarce areas because very little grows in the small lands that there are, and the land also being quite barren. So all of it leads to huge levels of malnutrition, both in children and in adults. So large number of people that walk in our clinics, more than half of them are severely malnourished with body mass index of less than 18.5, and children, of course, are wasted. There is also huge illness load because of several reasons. Malnutrition itself predisposes to illnesses, but also the work that many young men go and live in the cities, exposing them to dust, living in overcrowded situation. So many of them come back with diseases like tuberculosis or occupational diseases like silicosis, and they transmit some of these infections to the families. So there is a high burden of diseases on one hand, and malnutrition, and on the other hand, the access to health services is really poor. So the nearest health facility would be like 20-25 kilometers away, and with one bus flying there through the day, and the man not being at home, really exposes them to a situation where women in the left behind families are not able to access healthcare at all. And that's so what we started doing about 10 years ago was to set up community-based health services in these locations, which are managed by nurses who often come from similar areas themselves. They themselves are tribal girls, but who have studied nursing. One good thing that has happened in past 8-10 years is that there is increasing number of nurses being produced even from rural and tribal areas, especially from the areas that we work in. And so these facilities are based in the communities, in community premises, managed by nurses. And they are all women providers, and therefore women especially find it easier to reach out to these providers and seek care, including childbirth, but not only maternal and childhood, but also, we slowly built up being responsive to the needs that we saw. So for example, we started seeing a lot of tuberculosis, and then we started responding to that. Silicosis became another huge issue a couple of years back in one of the clinic areas that we started a new clinic in, and since then we've been working quite a bit on that as well. Since the nearest health facilities are pretty far, so we need to set up a referral system that could transport severely ill patients or patients who needed the next level of care. On the other hand, there is a whole community engagement aspect of it, including daycare centers, which we call as fulvaris, where younger children, the issue that Saraswati was talking of in urban areas. Actually, there's a mirroring of it in the rural areas. The only difference is that there the risk is more of from the building and the risk of the physical safety. Here we saw children being trampled over by the animals or falling down in a well, etc. And also nutrition, as I said, is a huge problem. So daycare centers that provide nutrition, early childhood education, addressing some of what we consider as one of the most important determinant of healthcare. Moving on to also support, things like kitchen gardens and poultry to improve household food availability, which we found that during COVID was extremely helpful, because people who had even a small kind of a backyard kitchen garden or a poultry were able to sustain some basic nutrition during those times. And again, I was just I was thinking when Lindsay was talking about it, being a community-based service makes so much of a difference in normal times, but especially in a crisis time, it became really evident when all the health facilities were closed. Our services continue to not only sustain, but actually expand several services, as well as the footfalls increase because there's nowhere else to go. And that situation, largely continues even beyond COVID, where people have limited money, limited movement. and therefore having inexpensive community-based services are so critical, even more at this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pavitra. And I think thank you so much for just sharing such distinct aspects of vulnerabilities that so many in our country face. Now, I'm going to shift the gear a little bit now and ask each of you, what are some of the things that NGOs need today from funders and civil society at large to continue to support communities meaningfully? And Dr. Pavitra, if I could start with you.
Okay, back to back. Okay. I think, as I said, that one thing that really became really important and very clearly visible was the need for decentralized services, need for community-based services during COVID. In normal times, you would ignore it because for people like us, it doesn't matter. We can take a car and go wherever the services are, even if they're centralized. But during this period, everybody became restricted mobility and restricted access. And that's when we started looking at what is available right in my house or closer by, responsive to my needs, which can, jack up their services when you really need them differently. So having continuity of these decentralized and community-based services is really critical. Wherever they are, we need to sustain them. Wherever they are not there, we need to really expand it to these areas. There is also, as some of us have said, that many public services have really floundered and closed down or restricted their deliveries, whether it was Anganwadis or health facilities which stopped doing deliveries, etc. And therefore, but at the same time, there is a huge network and a mandate that government has. So to also support, these decentralized healthcare services, decentralized nutrition services, and other social services, and to support them, be the bridge between the communities and the health providers in the government is also extremely important. So I think for that we really need the NGOs to be supported for a longer period of time and to allow them to be innovative and respond as the situation evolves. In fact, frankly, many of us, while being in the community, are cognizant of the changes that have happened post-COVID, but none of us are fully certain that what's going to unfold, right? I mean, we know that livelihoods have dwindled, the incomes have reduced, the access has become difficult, malnutrition levels we know have increased. How would that children have started coming out of, they have dropped out of school? How the situation is going to unfold is not fully clear. And therefore, one needs to be really ensure that you have enough and support and continued funding, as well as more innovative and flexible, so that one could respond to the situation as it unfolds, as well as continue to sustain the community-based health services in different places or the initiatives that are required. So that I would think is really a critical, we are in a critical juncture where we feel that the pandemic is ending, but what it has unleashed and the vulnerability that is further increased. As I said, it always existed. It's just that it has become more visible and it has further pushed us down, and therefore the need to continue and sustain the services is really important.
Thank you, Dr. Pavitra. Long-term funding is clearly a big need. Saraswati, if I could just come to you, and same question, as an organization, what do you think you need as support from the funding community and the civil society? Yeah. Sure.
I think some of the words that you're going to hear from all of us is going to be like unrestricted funding, flexibility in usage, right? And I mean, we didn't, we were about 3.5 years old when COVID started. And, very quickly we were able to start doing food relief, dry ration kit distribution, because at that point, about 50% of our donations came from individuals, and therefore it was unrestricted funding, right? So today is March 24th, and 2 years ago, oh my gosh, we were distributing dry ration kits. We were connecting with the local grocery shops, talking to our families, and so that they could go in batches to collect food. So we were able to do that really quickly, Sangeeta, because we had that cushion of unrestricted funding. And like Dr. Pavitra said, we don't know how things are going to keep evolving, right? And so CSR proposals we send with line items and budgets, and then moving budgets up and down requires approval, and there is there is a reason for all of that, and we get that. But what happens is when there is no flexibility, then to meet current needs becomes very difficult. Even our own program with early childhood care and education was, it was just evolving. 1 month we were spending on education, and then next month we couldn't. So, lockdown was there, so we were spending on the food. Once we were able to start classes again, we went back to building classrooms. And so being able, having that flexibility to meet those needs. second wave happened, right? I mean, things were just coming up, second wave happened. Again, we went into supporting our communities with dry ration kits. Vaccination, so much hesitancy in our communities, but we were able to do over 12 vaccination camps across our 10, 12 communities that we were working with at that point, and more than 500 adults were vaccinated. And so when we have flexibility in the funds that we've received, then we're able to meet the need and meet it quickly, right? I mean, we were all trying to get our feet, but I think one thing that really helped us was because we had that buffer. Later, people were donating for food relief, but it had to happen now, right? And Dasra supported us in our food relief in our second wave. And although you had earmarked that amount for food relief, because that need was met, you were very quick to say, yes, you can use that for your regular ECCE program. So when that flexibility is there, then we're able to serve them better. The other is really just investing in our teams, right? At Diagar, our core values are empathy, excellence, initiative, and integrity. And right from the time of interviewing, and through performance evaluations, all these elements come in, and we do a lot of training around this. And, it's always important to be, equipped to serve. And especially during COVID time, it came out how important it was. And, the team was very innovative. They were able to put others ahead of themselves and serve, and they were so quick to adapt. And so investing in capacity, you can't learn to row when you're in the middle of a storm, right? So just building all those capacities. The last thing, Sangeeta, I'm going to, say really is for us to look at, long-term impact. And, a lot of times when we pitch early childhood care and education, especially for children of migrant laborers, we are asked, what is the dropout rate, right? How many of them are you able to track when they go back to the village? How many of them are going into class 1? Soon they'll be asking about class 12, which is all good, right? I mean, yes, we want them to go into class 1. We're talking to them about it. But what about today, right? We started Diagar because we said, today we want a child to be in a safe space where they can have good, nutritious food, where the parents can have a hope that, my child is going to school and go to school. We've been talking about malnourishment, and these are the building blocks at 0 to 6 years. And so when, people say, okay, we have CSR funding for adolescents, I was like, maybe if we invest, I think this, I don't say, but maybe if we invest in early childhood care and education, we need less to do later, like Hasina was talking about prevention rather than, after they reach the destination. So for us to look at long-term, of course, numbers are important. I come from a background of accounting and finance, so I totally get that. But to look at long-term impact and for, CSRs to come together for that, it really makes a huge difference for our communities.
Thank you, Saraswati. Great points. If I could come to you, Lindsay, for you to share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat what other people have said too much. But I think one of the things that I would like to say is that support in the future could also be to let us build on some of the, in our area, in area of childbirth and pregnancy, community health. There are things, positive experiences that we have had. And there are some positive innovations that we've had to introduce in the last 2 years. And I wouldn't like to lose those. So I think one would be to document and advocate for those changes, particularly in a sphere like childbirth, where childbirth now is just, they're groping in the dark. I don't think that the health, the way that childbirth is going in India, we're just copying the West, and we've got skyrocketing rates of C-sections. So I think there's a time to question, and I think this is a good time to question, and it would be a good sign for maybe funders to invest in, like questioning and pointing out a different way of doing. That's one point I wanted to make. And the other one is, yes, flexibility, but also I think long-term, because if in communities like ours, we're trying to invest and build the skills of local people. And we're starting from we're starting from zero. The education system is so rotten that even if you get a matric pass girl, she can hardly string a sentence together. So, to build those people to a level where they're really contributing positively to the community, it will take us 2 years. Now you have a 2-year grant. So by the time your grant is ending, you're just about ready. I mean, we had this with a mental health program a few years ago. It was a 3-year project. By the time we got everybody in place and trained and everything, I mean, our grant is almost over. So I think, it would be good to have smaller funding over a longer time rather than having a huge amount over a short time, because sometimes we get like, or some crisis, you get a whole load of money dumped on you, and then, you're a little organization, you can't really spend it. And now, you come to the end of the year, then you have income tax problems and blah, blah, blah. And FCRA is coming up. So it would be nice to have smaller amounts of funding over a long time, and the commitment for long term. I think that would be a definite need. And I think apart from the financial side of things is that technology transfer. It would be helpful to get access to people and technology which is beyond us. There are many things which are beyond us, and even knowledge, access to knowledge. I mean, running an NGO nowadays is become very complicated, and our organization has really suffered badly because of this. We've been paying fines for things that we should have known and didn't know, the legalities of things, whether it's in FCRA or it's income tax or it's, GST or Provident Fund and all these little things which we don't have the wherewithal and knowledge, and we end up suffering. So it would be good for funders to maybe some sort of network or some, support for small organizations to, get some help in these aspects in order to run an NGO these days. We're not city-based, and I think this enough from my side.
Fantastic points. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Hasina, coming to you for you to share your perspectives.
Yeah, I think we all have one common thread, the capacity, and I think that is an evolving need of every nonprofit every day. And if I look even at Impulse, even after 32 years, we run an Impulse Case Management Center, a technology platform that brings the private and public, partnership, and also address a data management that, allows the anti-human trafficking units in the country to connect to it. But technology is evolving, and the team within the organization needs to be evolving and, developing themselves to be able to address much more efficiently. But in contextually to that, we don't have support, donors coming in to build that kind of, long-term sustainable staffing of an organization. And then the people who have been in the organization for a longer time, they need to skill themselves, to catch up with the time and need. So that is something where resources are never invested by any donors. At least in my 32 years of my experience, that is never something that they were looked into it. The other thing is working in a terrain like the Northeast, covering 8 states with 4 to 5 countries, neighboring countries, and working in 4 multiple countries, replicating an innovation, because the way Impulse has worked over the years is the heart and soul, the vision and mission of the organization is the Impulse model, the 12 pillars, which has allowed the flexibility of partnership of other organizations to be able to address a common vision. And that's very, very different, because these collective leaders who are there in the different zones are adopting an innovation which is allowing them to be able to scale, to address the work, not to reinvent the wheel. So what I really look into it is that when there is a solution where you don't reinvent the wheel, and there is a collective leaders of organization and a partnership model, it is very critical that donors come and see the workability of those models, enhancing those models to the next level. And that's what Impulse has tried to do and work really hard. And whether they are able to give 1 capsule of the 6 Ps or 2 capsules of it, but imagining having like 4 people coming in, 5 capsules, you're seeing a larger impact of the work that we can do. So that is something that we as an organization working in a very complex terrain, working in 4 multiple countries across the border, it's just not about scaling deep in the innovation that we've worked. We've been scaling out to replicate, and scaling up to get these policies that's required time to time, because it's all about working with crime issue, right? And the evolving law that is, attached to it as well. So these are the challenge, because we're working with deeper, work or serious work. There are needs like capacity building, which everybody has mentioned, but the legal framework that the country is evolving right now. If your HR team is not equipped to the legal framework, in addressing the legal framework, in addressing the HR framework. And I think our other friend, Lindsay, has mentioned that you are basically bogged down, right? So unless until that kind of support is provided to enable institutions to do better work, we end up doing administration 24/7. And the real work get dismissed, and half the time it's like you are bogged down. I mean, I'm just going to tell my own journey. In 32 years, I feel I'm going to the field, I'm getting bogged down, readdressing challenges. So that is where resources has to be put in if we have to see great work of nonprofit evolving, scaling, and innovation scaling. So I think that is something we really have to look deeper. And I think it's just not about getting one work done, right? It's about how the institution can get the work done better, in a better way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hasina. Finally, Nalini, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Good thing to go last is I don't have to talk much, and responsibilities to sum up. So I feel many of the points that people have spoken, I completely endorse. And I think in late 90s, we all said, you have to invest in the institution. And to see that today it's become the thing to do it. Funders are looking at it, philanthropists are looking at it, professionals are looking at it. Is really, really a great dream come true for us. So when you, the social sector is changing. One, with the legislations that are coming up, CSR is becoming more and more restricted, and more and more laws, and within 1 year you have to spend this much. I don't know whether from April 1st you will get that money or not. So it's becoming very tough, one. And so it's important that we should also look at how do we expand the thinking of individual donors, thinking of foundation which has more flexibility. So that is also important to look at our own portfolio to make the change. And we who have been working for a lot of years should also be agile. We should be ready to look at these changes, still not giving up our values and basic structure on which we have worked. So investment in an institution is always better than in one project for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. And Lindsay was saying small but long is really what is sustainable giving. So especially in our kind of situation where solid waste management is drastically changing, the new Clean India campaign or Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, pushing every year to raise the bar in service benchmark. What is happening is waste pickers who are in informal economy are left out. So how do we bring them to the economy that is everybody's talking? It's become an urban issue. It's a burning issue. The local government has the highest budgetary allocation is made for solid waste management, but the most work is done is in informal sector. How do we bridge that? How do we work with the government? But all this happens on the go. It's not like 1 year back, I sat and planned, okay, this is how I want to work with my government. It's not happening. Laws are changing. I have to really change my strategies by the go. So what happens is if you don't have a flexibility in your funding, it becomes a challenge. I mean, if your giving is so restricted, then where do this money come? Of course, what we do is we go do some sessions, get some resource money for the resource person. We just put it away as a new initiative money. So whenever somebody asks, can you do this? You just jump and go and do it. So, in order to be relevant to the changing economies, changing community aspirations, and also changing communities itself, you have to be agile and you have to be ready to make changes happen. So we have to reinvent ourselves to be relevant. Otherwise, we die and the work that we have done dies and the communities will be left behind. So it has to be very, very important that we reinvent ourselves to be relevant, and that needs a huge flexibility in the giving. But at the same time, we have to be very sure to open up our books. We have to be transparent. building trust comes on both ends, you know. So capacity building of how to keep your accounts, capacity building of how to use the you know, technology is also important. And if you want that kind of a capacity building from the funders, you should be open to showing your books. I mean, we are ready to even share everything with our community, so it's not a problem. But we also have to change the way we work and build the trust. So we have to be relevant to the changing, you know, changing circumstances.
Thank you so much, Nalini and others. I'm not even going to try to summarize because there were so many points, good points, great points there. We heard a lot from this panel. Clearly a more inclusive approach in giving, funding innovation in nonprofits, which translates to more flexibility in grant making, trust, bridging the trust deficit between NGOs and funders, and funding for long term seem to be some of the ways to build the path to a more inclusive, thriving, and equitable India. On that note, thank you, NGO leaders, for speaking to us and sharing valuable insights that I'm sure will stay with us and enable collective action. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Taking cue from something all of these leaders just spoke about, the need to relook at giving practices, we will now segue into a conversation focused on how funders and intermediaries can implement this thought, and what more should they do as stakeholders on whom NGOs depend heavily for financial support, as well as look up for guidance and expertise. To lead this segment, we have with us today Sonal Sachdev Patel. Sonal is the CEO of GMSP Foundation, a family foundation based in the UK, supporting NGOs across UK and India. Sonal has been a crusader of supporting small grassroots NGOs. Not only is she a board member of Dasra UK, but also a friend, advisor, funder, and champion of Dasra. Welcome, Sonal. The panelists for the segment would include Maya Patel and Deval Sami. Maya is the executive chair of the Tarsadia Foundation, a multi-generational US-based family foundation that supports causes globally and especially in the US and India. We are honored to have Tarsadia Foundation as an anchor funder, co-founding the Rebuild India Fund with Dasra. Deval needs no introduction, but just in case you don't know him, he is the co-founder of Dasra and the force behind the Rebuild India Fund. Welcome all, and Sonal, handing over to you.
Thanks, Sangeeta. I have to, first of all, just acknowledge these amazing 5 grassroots leaders. What an honour to be able to hear them speak. And I think it's so humbling to all of us because it reminds us we're talking about this now, but they've been working on these issues for so many years. And what really struck me that many of them said was that when everyone else closed their doors, we kept our doors open. And I think they're the anchor today and for this discussion. And so I wanted to come to you first, Deval, that I know that you wanted to respond to the crisis that you saw, and Dasra responded really quickly, but that you also have been having all of these conversations and working so closely with these NGO leaders. Can you share your journey over the last couple of years, how it's impacted you personally and how that's affected the approach of Dasra?
Of course, and I just want to echo your comments, Sonal. I think it's the 5 leaders that you've just heard from and the 150 that we've been able to support over the last year, which really are the base of this initiative. And I want to make that very clear. I think they're the ones who were there from day one. They've been there before COVID. They're definitely going to be there after COVID. And I think it's really important for all of us just to recognize how rich of a civil society we have in our country and how we as a society need to do a far better job in supporting these groups. And I say that just because I think that's really been the reawakening, so to speak, that has happened to us as an organization. As you said, Sonal, we've been around for 22 years. We've been very, very lucky to serve groups like Magic Bus and Akshay Patra and Educate Girls and Arman and Ungin Trust, and the list literally goes on and on and on. But we started working with all of these groups when their budgets were less than 50 lakhs. We sort of were in the field. We helped them with, thinking about their strategies. We helped them in raising financial support. We helped them in building capacity on their management teams, really to create the level of impact and scale that we see today. But at the same time, we unfortunately, as Dasra, took our eye off of the ball on the new group of organizations that we should be working with. And to be honest with you, we became comfortable, we became lazy, and it was easy for us to support these groups that we had already built the capacity of versus going out and saying, who else needs support? And I think it unfortunately took a once-in-a-century pandemic for us to realize this and say, what about those groups that, whose solutions may not be as scalable? What about the groups that are still fledgling? What about the communities, as Dr. Pavitra just said, which are decentralized across the country, and maybe a solution that's happening in Tamil Nadu may not work for a group working in the Northeast. And I think we realize that as Dasra, and I can at least speak personally for myself, we have let these communities down. I personally have focused on a different cadre of organizations, all that are doing fantastic work, but didn't realize how do we keep replenishing the group of organizations that are doing just amazing work across the country. How do we start focusing on proximate leaders, leaders from the community themselves who created these solutions and didn't wait for them to reach a certain age or get their first million rupees or pounds or dollars in the bank and saying, now I'm going to look at charity. These are individuals, just like we heard from today, who have actually said very early on in their lives that they were going to make a difference for the communities in and around themselves and not wait till the perfect solution happens, but actually to start working on the ground and making a difference today. And I think for us as Dasra, this was a real wake-up call and realization that we need to support them. And we've been really honored and privileged, again, to support 150 organizations like this so far and look to support 100 annually. And really the job and the goal for us is not to grow these organizations. And I want to make that very clear because at times Dasra has been synonymous with scale, but really just helping them rebuild. Time is of essence, number one, and two, like all of the speakers said in front of us, these communities have suffered significantly. If 3% of children, as we saw in the video, have attended school for 2 years, that means 97% have not. If 200 million families have slipped back into poverty, just think of where they're at. I think all of us are privileged to be vaccinated, and some of us have been boosted, and all of us have been working over Zoom, but most of Bharat does not have that. And I think as all Indians and all global citizens, we need to realize that we need to provide a different mode of support, long-term, flexible, and we need to provide, honestly, the same trust to these NGOs leaders as they have provided to the communities for the last years and decades.
That's a really honest reflection, Bevel, and I think I'm glad you're echoing about long-term unrestricted funding, but also what stands out to me is that you are self-reflecting, and I think all funders need to do that and look at what are we doing well and what are we not doing well, and how do we pivot and how do we change our strategy. And Maya, I'd like to come to you next, because you were in California when all of this was unfolding, and I'd love to know what was going through your mind at that point and what made you decide to engage and do something about what was happening in India.
It was a very devastating time. We lost a lot of family members within our family, in our community, and it was difficult as everybody around the world was feeling. But we realized that our partners really needed us, and there was something that we needed to do. And we immediately did a relief fund that we just gave out to everybody that we supported because we needed them to keep their lights on. And that was really important for us. That was our first step to understand the devastation that was about to unfold, because really it was early days. But everything shut down, it was a lockdown. So how do we communicate? How do we approach? The whole system had to be reworked. And that was something that we realized was important because we had that access, but most other people did not have that access. And even in the US, there were very large numbers of devastations and crises that were happening within our community. So we depended on the nonprofits and make sure that they got what they needed. And we really spent a lot of time talking to them. We spent a lot of time researching and opening up our channels to get information. That's the only way that we can make the right decisions. And through that, we realized that we had to do not just the immediate, but also second and third stage. And we realized that, it was going to be resiliency, it was going to be rebuild, and structure our funding so that we could, implement that throughout the year and throughout the years. So really, it was more of a learning session for us, and we really pivoted our thinking and getting our guidance from everywhere, all sectors of the funding world. And it was really important to us to listen. We really had to listen and stop thinking about what we knew, because we knew nothing. We had no idea, how are we this was a huge challenge for everybody. So in that aspect, I think we were already doing that. We were doing it in our small way, but COVID really pushed us to take a step forward and rethink about how we address our funding and how to help people. We don't have the answers. We're not the experts. We got to rely on the folks on the ground. And that's what we did. We really just changed our focus and turned it towards them. And it was very impactful. And really, when we learned about the crisis that was happening in India in 2021, we were, everybody was on the phone. Like, what do we do? How do we get the supplies there? How do we get the oxygenators, to India? What do we do? And we know in the US, we have those resources. In a third world country, it's difficult to get them right away. And the number of people in India is very different from us. So that, I think, was where I really found the greatest piece of every member in the family, every person in our community stepped up and wanted to do something. And that's when you realize there's a love for India. There's really something that, pulls us, and we need to do something. And everybody stepped up. Everybody really came together, and a great force of work, life force was happening. This energy was forming that just really not only impacted us, but we were able to help others too. So that's how we approached it.
It's so wonderful to hear, and I can feel that purity of intention, and so much of what you said, I think, resonates with all of the good practice that the NGO leaders were telling us, and hearing about you listening to what the grassroots leaders were saying, engaging in conversations, also engaging with the NRI community. You're so right, there is such a strong connection with India, and sometimes we don't know what the right thing to do is, but we know that we want to help. And Devil, coming back to you, I know that Dasra responded really quickly and was also having multiple conversations across the world. And one of the first things you did was respond with getting oxygen concentrators. That was your initial response. And talk to me a little bit more about what happened then and what made you realise that much more was going to be needed than that initial response.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think, again, it was the second wave that really hit India, and that's really what prompted us into action. But I think we had already had a year of the ramifications of the lockdown and what communities were facing. And so I think sort of being frustrated and feeling guilty that we're not doing enough, like I said, personally, or even as an organization, we had a year to sort of think about that. We had a year to realize how the gap between the haves and the have-nots have just increased significantly. And there was no sort of turning back. And we had a year to realize, again, individuals like ourselves, that work in the NGO sector, we're still privileged that we had a house, we had a roof over our heads, we were able to work with Zoom, our salaries still remained, and we were able to have our children also be educated online, where that wasn't the case for the majority of our country, women and men. And so I think for us, it was more, what can we do that's long-term and sustainable, number one. I think number two, to your point, Sonal, we, I think like many others, sort of went down the path in the last week of April, to be specific, around let's get oxygen concentrators, because that was the need. And within 24 hours, after just sending an email out, we were able to raise support for 450 oxygen concentrators. But within that 24-hour period, we figured out that the cost of oxygen concentrators literally doubled in value. We had funds that are well known and were supported by many large corporations and private equity funds here in India, for example, that ended up buying the same concentrators that we were looking at our NGOs purchasing for literally double the price. And I say that because it's really important to realize that as a sector, we were driving up the prices ourselves and outbidding each other. And in the name of sort of, oh, well, we want our logo to show up on these concentrators, we ended up paying companies far greater value than these concentrators were even worth. And at that time, because May 1st, China was going to go on holiday, if we didn't actually place those orders in at that time, chances were those orders would not come until mid-July. And we knew by that time, unfortunately, many people would have died. And by that time, the concentrators may not even be useful. In that same conversation, like Maya was saying, we saw lots of people around the world gathering support, again, talking about oxygen, but very few were saying, okay, well, how are we going to train these individuals to use these concentrators? Are we also going to provide them the transformers required to do the step down on electricity? Or are we going to ensure that the nozzles that are required in these concentrators are being used effectively and even purchased? And so, again, it was sort of this flurry of everyone wanting to do well. And we've seen this with the tsunami, with the Gujarat earthquake, and other natural disasters that have hit India since Dasra has been operating, and realized that, honestly, it was time to take a pause. It was time to listen to these organizations and provide them the most flexible support we can. Because today, the need may be food, but by the time the aid comes in, the need may be something else. And as one of the speakers said in the earlier session, unfortunately, most donors, especially corporates, are very particular, but you said you were going to buy this many food packets, not actually thinking about food packets may not be the need, and vaccines may be the need by the time that aid actually gets dispersed. And so for us, it was really about how do we respond to not only this crisis that was unfolding in front of us, but how do we bring in the best principles of grant making in this fund, stuff that as Dasra we've seen for the last 20 years and we've been advocating for, but unfortunately the funders have not caught up. They haven't been as thoughtful, they haven't been as participatory in letting NGOs decide where the money goes, and they haven't even had NGOs choose other NGOs, and that was something we did through this process with the Roddenberry Foundation. We actually had NGOs recommend other NGOs and funded them blindly because we knew, again, if the NGOs are recommending their peers, what better recommendation can you get than a funder sitting in Mumbai or outside saying, these are the groups that we can fund. So really bringing that trust-based philanthropy back into Dasra's vision is critical. And I know we have a long way to go, but we hope that we can demonstrate through this exercise that other funders really need to change the way that they give and their approach, and really provide, greater flexibility and trust the communities that we're trying to serve, because they know best, not us.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, Bevel. I fully agree with you, and it's really nice to see this relationship that has formed between Dasra and the Tarsadia Foundation as well. And I can see that trust and that mutual respect and those similar values are there. And I imagine that's what's led to this quite strong partnership. But Maya, I'd love to hear from you that your foundation has existed for multi-generations, and why now? What is it that made you want to respond in this way, and what is it about the Rebuild Fund that makes you feel it's different from other funds, and why is this going to create the systemic change that we all want?
Yeah, I think, Devil and I go back maybe 10 years or so when I first met Devil, and it took us a long time to get to where we are. It was a slow and steady pace that we really needed to earn our trust, right? We needed to make sure that Devil and Dasra was doing what they're saying. And, and from my father's perspective, it was like, who are these people? Where do they come from? And what are they doing? And so I had to build that. It took us some time. And when we went into the rebuild phase, it was like, who are we going to talk to? How will we, sitting in Los Angeles, figure out which organizations to give to? And those organizations that are doing the best work are on the ground. They don't have their names and flashlights on on big billboards. So that was where I said, if I don't have Dasra on my side, there's no way I'm going to make this happen. And it really developed over years, but it was very important that we take the step now. That when I went to the board and I said, look, this is our moment. If we don't do this now, why would we wait? This is the time of need. And they all really very, they were very conscious of the fact that we needed to make a move now. And so I think building up the trust, making sure that we were going to do something that was going to be impactful, and why wait? That was what we went with. I think it worked out, you know.
So I think any multi-generational foundation will resonate with that point you made about when your father comes in and says, who are these people again? What are we doing? So Bevel, tell us about it. You were talking to so many different people, so many foundations, and that's where plays this really pivotal bridge role where you have one hand talking constantly to NGO leaders, a bit like today, and one talking to funders. And often, like you say, you've been talking about trust-based philanthropy for so long, but you're having to get funders to move on that journey. And sometimes that takes time because they're not in the same rooms and the spaces that you are. So tell us about, from your perspective, how did this relationship click, and what are you seeing with other funders that are looking to fund in India, and how is that changing?
No, thank you. I mean, I think we've just, in that sense, been very privileged and lucky to be working with a wide range of NGOs through the years that, literally we were able to pick up the phone, to call, see how they're doing. And like the last, set of speakers talked about, the NGO leaders have been our community. And so the same way when something hits, they're able to respond to their communities the best because they've known those communities without the crisis, and they've been supporting them for so long. We as Dasra, I guess, have been able to have that same vantage point with over 1,000 organizations across the country. And so for us, it was very easy to pick up the phone to these groups, even some of them that we had not spoken to in 5 years or 7 years, and just be like, what's happening? How can we be more helpful? What can we do to really channel your voice, to any and all relationships we have? On the flip side, I guess, with funders, just by one email, sort of kicked out this campaign. We had the target of raising 2 to 3 crores of support, and we said, look, even if that's something, we need to do that. And as Maya said, we all, including individuals at Dasra, saw our own families dying unnecessarily during this period. We saw what happened. We saw the lack of oxygen. We saw what was going on, and how we weren't able to help even people that we knew and loved, and realize that what about the billion that don't have the same relationships, connections, and access that we do? What are they going through? And so for every parent that we know was lost in this process, we knew there were hundreds of thousands that were being lost, and no one was really supporting them in that process. And so I think, Sonal, we were able to then tap into just older relationships, again, on the funder side, with a similar sort of view, and groups that we had not worked with for years just came out of the woodwork and said, look, we've worked with you, we trust you, we know you're on the ground. And just like Maya said, they also knew that the approach that we would use is not about Dasra partners. In fact, I'm very proud to say 90 of the organizations out of the 150 were groups we have never worked with before. And I think that's really the goal here, is that we need to go outside of our comfort zones. We need to look at groups that we have never supported before. And we were just very lucky that we had, again, whether it's Fidelity Foundation, Gates Foundation, large Hong Kong-based family foundation, the Arthur Blank Foundation, Hewlett, Packard, so many groups sort of came together, and just off of the email and literally getting on calls, not just with us, because we're not in the thick of this, but with our NGO leaders, I think we were able to raise quite a bit of capital. I mean, 75 crores within a few weeks. We were able to disperse those funds as well within a few months. And realists said, okay, well, as Vishal will talk about earlier, this is the start of something, not at all the end of something. Again, the emergency was there, but what we need to do to go forward is going to be critical to create that level playing field that we all want for all of India. But it will take time, it will take effort, and it will take a different way of giving and thinking.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's wonderful to see how much self-reflection is happening. And then Maya, just coming back to you finally, it's interesting that you're part of a multi-generational foundation, and I'd love to know, how do you think that your approach has evolved since your parents' generation, and how do you think things that will happen differently going forward? And I guess just to qualify that, it's not about improving on our parents' generation, because of course our parents we wouldn't be here without our parents, but more just this whole understanding that we now have that maybe we didn't have before, and that the power structures that have changed, that have made us realize that there are different ways of potentially doing things.
Yeah, you know, I think what really struck me was when this was happening with the Rebuild Fund, and how my father was being so open, you know, open-minded to listen, to say, okay, you know what, I've done it this way, it worked for me, and that was great during his time. And now I'm kind of, you know, giving this over to you, the second and third generation, to take it as you feel is right and correct. And today, we need this, you know, and so that transition and that, you know, that handover was very important, because then we have his blessings. We know that we're going to do this in the right way. That's important for what's happening in the crisis in our world, because they're always changing. There's always going to be something different that comes up. And our third generation sees that, and sees that this is an easy transition. We can make this happen if we all communicate together. If we come together, it's not about what we believe in, or it's about what the organizations on the ground need, what's happening in our world. And those conversations are super important. So we started those at an earlier age, and we want that conversation to continue. So that's how we transfer that knowledge and the, you know, the power of our work. So in that context, now the third generation is looking at how are they going to be addressing some of the needs of our current times. They're very innovative. They're very thoughtful. They don't just think about, you know, just the micro. They think about macro. They think about it in different levels, which is refreshing for us as a family. And they're entrepreneurs, you know, and they lead with fearless humility. That's something that we really value in our family, because our parents were risk takers. They did it all. And so how do we give that power to our NGOs as well? And how do we transfer all of the knowledge throughout the whole circle, you know? And I think that's what's important, is like the third generation is going to carry it forward as they see fit. And, you know, partners and the NGOs that we work with, we need to give the power to them. They're the ones that really know. We don't have the answers. We'll never be the experts. And, you know, we don't want to claim that we are. And I think that's where learning and having humility in that is really important. And that's where I think the family really can grow the most. You know, I'm not sure if I answered your question properly, but I think that's how I feel. That it's really, yeah.
I love that phrase, and fearless humility. If we can all operate with fearless humility, then I think we will definitely move forward with our targets. And with that, I'd like to really thank both of you for your honesty and your self-reflection. It's really refreshing to be able to hear from both of you, and to understand how you evolved and what you're doing differently, because I know personally I can learn so much from that. And it was wonderful to hear from the NGO leaders as well. So with that, I'm going to hand back over to Vishal now.
Thank you so much, Sonal. And thank you, Maya and Deva. If I can, to fearless humility, if I can add a term that Deva's really been personifying, is righteous anger. You know, especially over the last couple of years, which I think has been spot on, actually. So with that, we come to the last 8 or 10 minutes of our session, and please stay with us. I know we're in that post-lunch food coma slot, but y'all have been brave and stuck with us so far. So, you know, over the next few minutes, I'll get into a little bit more detail about what is the Rebuild India Fund. And just because there's so much information and some data to communicate, we are doing it through PowerPoint. I know you'll have, you know, we've stayed away from PowerPoint so far, but thought that this time around for this piece, we'd actually go back to the good old. Now, this session will get into some detail about the fund. We want to invite a lot of questions, recommendations, suggestions as I do go into it. We won't have time for a lot of Q&A, but we promise that we are going to have a lot of FAQs posted on a website that we will launch on the last slide at the end of the session, as well as webinars that unpack more about what nonprofits and funders can look forward to specifically around the Rebuild India Fund. So with that, what is the Rebuild India Fund? The Rebuild India Fund is a movement to build resilience. As Deval said, we're building on a rapid relief campaign, and it's just the beginning, right? And looking ahead, we will make 5-year commitments of flexible funding of 10 lakh rupees, or roughly $13,500 per year, to 100 new grassroots NGOs annually. So that's per year, per organization, 5-year commitments, and each rupee, each dollar will be backed by capacity building support, exposure building support by Dasra. We have a few important cornerstones to this fund. I'm hoping JEDI, or Gender Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, is one that you might be somewhat familiar with, as Dasra is approaching this with serious intentionality, and it's something that we've been speaking about, and it's been cutting across a lot of our sessions. In the context of the Rebuild India Fund, it means that in curating this portfolio, we will look for representation in NGO leadership and in boards of women leaders, of leaders who are from the communities that they serve, leaders from minority and underserved groups. We're looking for smaller nonprofit organizations with budgets of between 40 lakhs to 5 crore rupees. We're looking for lesser known nonprofit organizations with lesser or relatively limited presence or exposure to the mainstream philanthropic ecosystem. We're talking about nonprofits focusing on remote and vulnerable groups with interventions that connect directly with underserved communities. And importantly, the Rebuild, we hope for this to be not a very Dasra controlled sort of environment, right? We want this to be an open platform, right, that allows these nonprofits to connect with funders and other ecosystem stakeholders to strengthen core capabilities like leadership, financial planning, fundraising. How do you build agility? That's something we heard so much in the session facilitated by Sangeeta, as well as specific capabilities in communications, technology, digital enablement of organizations and their programs. So that's really at the core and heart of what the fund actually is. Now, how are we thinking about success, right? So we've got some information on there, and really, while we have had over the last 12 months, and we know we will continue to be able to aggregate a really impressive and large amount of outreach and output indicators across this growing portfolio, right? That will be 100 organizations this year. We'll add another 100 next year. So the portfolio will increase to 200, and then 300, and then 400. So the volume is vast, and the outreach and the outputs will be vast. But really what we're most interested in as far as success, long-term success is relevant, we're looking to build a deeper understanding of resilience, right? And whether this vehicle, this movement, will have actually increased resilience and thereby decrease vulnerability of nonprofit organizations and of the communities that they serve. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of frameworks out there. We're looking at a lot of existing frameworks, and over the years have also developed some of our own, right? That that track some of this increase in resilience, right? Or organizational development, whether you're talking about, looking at diversity in the funder mix, right? Financial risk and reserve ratios, leadership strengths. But we want, again, to be open. We want to learn. We think there's a wealth of knowledge out there. As Deval said, for us, this experience of the last 12 months of going out there and pushing ourselves outside our comfort zone has led us to learn, led us to have new learning. So there's a lot that we want to learn, and we will be reaching out for that. And then lastly, I think in terms of how we think about success, a really important point to mention here is also that we want to be able to mainstream these organizations, but also this kind of philanthropy. And so that is also something that Dasra and the fund, we will hold ourselves accountable to. Now, as we talk about this is all future oriented stuff, right? But it's important to also, to know and to consider that a lot of this is already happening, as they were mentioned. And so, we've got a little information there. We've just had our heads down running with, sort of implementing this rapid relief campaign. And we thought we'd use this opportunity to also share how much has actually been accomplished so far. And so thanks to the amazing work of the frontline nonprofits themselves, our sourcing partners like RCRC, Gunj, the Roddenberry Foundation, Azim Premji Foundation, Paul Hamlin Foundation, that work with these incredible grassroots organizations, we've already supported 152 organizations across India and really pushed ourselves to go into the further reaches of India. Now, if you look at, J&K, and if you look at Jammu and Kashmir, and if you look at the Northeast, they're not as green, right? We've not been able to support as many organizations there, even though we have supported organizations there. But in the future, we will push ourselves to really color up this map to be dark green, especially in those further and more remote parts of the country. And I should also mention that so far, we've also already brought this portfolio together for capacity building support. Just this past weekend across December, we've actually gotten 100 of these organizations, many of whom you've heard from, and 150 leaders across these organizations into capacity building sessions, both to learn about what's happening on the ground across themes like healthcare, livelihoods, education, disability, but also to start talking about some capabilities in communication technology. And that will continue. If we can go to the next slide, we will talk a little bit about how the organizations that we've already curated reflect some of these cornerstones, right? So these organizations are already addressing several highly vulnerable and marginalized groups in India. Almost 50% of the current portfolio is led by women, and almost 40% of the organizations are actually have budgets below 2 crores, right, of what we've already funded. And so, again, this gives for Dasra sort of the tailwinds, right, that we take with us into the future as we build out this movement and support even more of these kinds of organizations. And then what's made this possible, as we move on to the next slide, is really this outpouring of support, that we saw, right, not just funding globally, but also an openness to give differently, right? As Deval was saying, like that's required. And we're seeing good signs of that, right? Of willingness to pool funding, willingness to give flexible funding, right? We've seen that funders have trusted Dasra and, the organizations that we've supported, with long-term, with flexible funding. And most importantly, we think this will continue. We don't think this is a one-off, but we will be behind this and ensure that this momentum is taken forward. And we've received support. Deval mentioned a lot of these fantastic organizations that have trusted us so much, and we've mentioned a few of their names and logos here. And I should also mention that while we believe in over the next 5 to 10 years that the US and UK will continue to be a major part of the funding of this pooled fund, we will push ourselves to take that percentage of India to at least 20% and raise 20% of the overall 50 million fund for local funding for non-FCRA organizations, as we know how important that is. So looking ahead, and I know I'm just a minute over, and I'll sort of start wrapping up here. We know we have our work cut out for us, and we've been working a lot, and we will continue to work a lot, just like the organizations on the ground are doing. And so we will spend the next quarter curating this portfolio, begin granting in quarter 2 of this coming financial year, and then begin our needs assessment and all the in-person and virtual capacity building, starting in quarter 2 of this fiscal onwards. And in that first quarter, I should also mention, like I did in the beginning, we'll be coming back to all of you all with webinars that unpack a lot more of this and give organizations a sense of what we're really looking for. So if we move on to the next slide, finally, as I wrap up here, that's our logo, powered by Tarsadia Foundation and Dasra. We hope we can all take comfort from the warmth of that sun around Rebuild, with the rays representing community. rebuildindiafund.org. Our website is now live, and if you want to learn more about which of the groups that have been supported so far, where are they, and how they've been able to provide rapid relief, it's all available on the website, and we will continue to build on this site and provide a lot more information and learnings through it. So I know I've rushed through this. Thanks for being with us. And I'd like to, in closing, thank all of our nonprofit partners, all of our funders for the trust that they've reposed in Dasra, in this fund, and especially the Rebuild India team, that, as we call ourselves, the Rebuild team, that's been working tirelessly over the last sort of 12 months in giving out these, in granting more than Dasra ever has in such a short period. And yes, so we look forward to having you all join us, and we will be in touch with a lot more information. And before we end, if I could please request all of you all to participate in a short feedback poll, and do tune in to the next session today on accelerating large-scale social transformation in livelihoods. That'll be up at 5 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone.